Well, if you can hear it, that's fine, because you're going to kick it off anyway.
That's a good point.
I know what I said.
That's a good point.
I know what I said. I know it was a bad thing to say.
Well, Jonny, it's lunch. It's 59 for 1 to England. Lead by 99. So feeling a bit comfortable.
We've heard of the commentator's curse, haven't we? That's a tough listen, Charlie. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Corridor of Uncertainty. For so much of that first test, we were having a great time. And as you said there, it's all feeling a bit comfortable. Do you want to tell our lovely listeners about the context behind that, what we've just listened to there?
Yeah, Jonny was asleep. He was in Liverpool, and I was just giving him some updates, and that was the first of many updates. And the rest were much, much less positive than that. I would like to say that was said with trepidation in the voice. I hope you can hear that. It was me being worried because it felt comfortable, and I knew it couldn't stay like that. Because it had been a real seesaw test up to about that point. You know, momentum had been wrestled to and fro every half an hour, it felt like. And as short of a game it was a very good game. And it was a very close game up until about 10 minutes after lunch, and then Australia just ran away with it, as they can do.
As they can do, it almost a sense of inevitability looking back on it. But so we got up, didn't we, to watch the first session. So I suppose we'll rewind back to that. There's a social media clip that we've got up that you can check out on our Instagram of us watching the first over. The first ball went by without any damage done, but the same could not be said for the first over. Of course, we lost Crawley straight away, and at that point. And that first session, it seemed to be slipping away from England, and it seemed like we wouldn't even get to this point of heartbreak over throwing away a test that we should have won, because it looked like we were throwing it away straight away, didn't it?
It did. It's worth mentioning that up until the halfway stage, the game looked like it was going to follow a very similar pattern to the fixture that was at the Perth Stadium last summer, which was Australia versus India. India batted first, got what looked like way too few, and then when it was Australia's turn to bat, they got even less. But then India were able to rack up a huge total thanks to Jaiswal and KL Rahul and Virat Kohli's last Test 100 before his retirement. And I think when it was 59 or whatever for 1 at lunch, I was thinking that maybe England were going to be able to do the same and get a big total. But Australia just really got the ball to talk after lunch. It wasn't flattening out. And I think because the game was on fast forward, England weren't even able to get to the point where the pitch was going to start behaving itself. And we saw the pitch start to behave itself when Australia were chasing. Now, the thing about that is Perth follows a pattern which you see in a lot of grounds, which are good for seam bowling. You have it in England as well, in places like the Oval, where the first day and a bit it's tough to bat, and then days 2 and 3 is when you can really cash in, and then day 4 and 5 it starts to deteriorate again. I think were Australia chasing 200 on a day 4 pitch, it would have been really hard, but they actually ended up getting the best of the conditions in the 4th innings, which isn't something we'd typically expect, but the game just moved so quickly that that's what happened.
I just realised, Charlie, that I haven't got the document in front of me.
No worries.
So if you could send that to me.
I've emailed it to you.
Okay, great. So I suppose to discuss the England collapse, we first must talk about the house they built in order for it to be blown over by the angry wolf of the Australian batters. So how did we get there? How did we get here, Charlie?
I think one thing I would like to say about this test is, as much as it's got a bit of a Bazball, as much as it's got a little bit of a Bazball sheen on it, it does mirror a lot of other England defeats that we've seen in Australia over the years. Yes, they scored very quickly. Yes, they bowled very quickly. But I think the fast scoring wasn't the reason for the collapses, but it also sort of didn't really help. And I wrote yesterday that I think Obviously, if there had been batters getting out to horrible swipes or dancing down the pitch, they would get pelters and it would look awful. But a lot of the dismissals from the England batters were ones that we've come to expect from them as individual players. Right. You've got Crawley with his feet planted, trying to play a booming drive on the up, which basically means the ball was bouncing far too high for him to attempt to drive, which is something that's just something he does. He doesn't really assess the merits of the ball before he tries to drive it. He just tries to drive it. Right. And then in the second innings, he sort of closed his bat face on one that caused it to pop up, which is actually becoming a worryingly common thing for him. He did it to Matt Henry last winter as well. As much as it was a screamer of a catch from Mitch Starc, you've got to analyse how the ball was getting there anyway. I think Ollie Pope fell over. I think when we watched it live, we thought he was a little bit unlucky. It was clipping leg stump. It was umpire's call. But it's actually the kind of dismissal that we see from him all too often. He looked a lot more balanced and steady for most of this match, but in that instance, got fired into his pads and his balance, he overcorrects, he falls over and he misses it. Ben Stokes just can't play Mitch Starc. That's a long-running issue. And it was an in-swinger in the first innings and an outswinger in the second, so he's got a lot to dwell on. Root just doesn't look the same batter in Australia. He looks like he's really missing that dabbed third man that we spoke about last time, that he's so good at getting off strike with. He looks like he's not playing his natural game in Australia. It looks like he's really having to force the issue. Even in the second innings, he danced down the track first ball, which we don't necessarily expect from him. And he just doesn't seem to have that same clarity of thought. And I think Harry Brook as well, the short ball indecisiveness. I thought he played really well in the first innings and he was the one who took the attack to Australia.
Yeah, he looked willing just to blast it about, I think. He looked the most, and you say that he does epitomise Bazball, but he looked like the one that was really flying the flag for Bazball in that first innings.
Yeah, and it was the way to go. I think the second innings shows that. I think Harry Brook had much more success, and as did Ben Duckett, as did Ollie Pope in that first innings, disrupting the length of Scott Boland in particular by moving their feet, like moving down the track, moving back in their crease, moving left and right. And someone like Scott Boland who just wants to put it on a length, I don't want to diminish his talents, but that's what he does, and he doesn't have a plan B. It's been clear in the innings he's played against Bazball, England, that he doesn't have a plan B and that he is disruptible. In the first innings, he went for 0 for 62 off 10 overs, which is so unlike him. But then in the second innings, when that had been working, he got in his rhythm, he got on a length, and all you saw the England batters doing, be it Harry Brook, be it Ollie Pope, is just hang the bat out there with no foot movement, no sort of movement down the track. And it cost them. And it not only that, it wasn't a profitable shot for anyone, that sort of cover drive throughout the game. I told you the anecdote off camera about Sachin Tendulkar in his famous innings at Sydney, I believe, where he put the cover drive away. He had the sort of mental strength to just remove an entire shot or shot selection from
Wasn't
his
it
arsenal.
one of his best shots as well?
Yeah. And he hit 241 in that innings. So England just needed to do something like that. I'm not saying like a way to replace that is, dance down the track, hit it, cross-batted, just do something different. It's what Harry Brook did in the first innings, but he eventually fell to a bouncer, which is his weakness, and he fell in such a tame way where he actually decided against playing it. He unbazballed himself. He tried to stop himself, but he just left his gloves dangling. Right. And it was a catch down the leg side.
So, I mean, this inability then, you mentioned, to put away a certain shot, even if it is one of your best shots, and just go, well, for these conditions, against this opponent, in this context, what is going to work? Let's just stick with that. And this, is that a part of Bazball? Is it just, the kind of do what you feel is right, don't worry about playing the conditions, don't worry about it, just do what feels right, man? Or is it a mental block? Is it England's inability in Australia to adapt? Where are these collapses coming from?
I think it's hard to say, from my perspective, say just put away a shot. And obviously you need the context that Sachin Tendulkar is possibly the greatest batsman of the last 50 years. So to just do what Sachin does...
Just do what Sachin does, mate.
It's not easy. I think what's frustrating, say Ollie Popen as an example, he showed promise in this test and looked a lot more comfortable than I think we were expecting him to look. But the second innings in particular was an incredibly frustrating one because he's known as a bad starter. He started fine. And it was actually an innings that got worse as time went on. Even by lunch, he made it to lunch, but he was playing worse by the end of lunch than he was playing when he came in. And at the start of the innings, he was completely willing to leave on length, which is something you can do on a bouncy Australian pitch, meaning that even if it's angling in at your stumps, you know if it's pitching in a certain place, it's going to bounce over. And Scott Boland is typically putting it on a length where he's only challenging one mode of dismissal. He's trying to get the edge. And if you're to not play at it, you're never getting bowled. You're never getting out LBW. And that's something that Pope clearly recognised, and he was doing that. And then as he tried to put his foot down, he was just taking a horrible swipe at everything outside the off stump. And it very unsurprisingly cost him. And I think if you're talking about Bazball and the inability to adapt, I think they can adapt, but I think what was frustrating about this situation is that there were 3 almost identical dismissals within 10 minutes of each other. And it's like, well, you need to be learning from that. You need to be looking at what, especially considering it's the second dig. It's the second innings. You should be familiar with the pitch. The characteristics hadn't changed at that point. You just need to understand that let's not do what he just did because it got him out.
It sounds so obvious, doesn't it, Charlie? And I guess I'm trying to get my head round, because that is something that you would just think at this level that you would do, that you would analyse or just see what, the bloke who's been out there before you, where his weaknesses were, what went wrong. And when you see when a batter comes on and a batter goes off, they have a little chat about the conditions. They say, well, the ball's doing a bit, the conditions are like this, blah blah blah. So you'd imagine those conversations are taking place. Is it just the pressure of the moment, do you think, or is it laps? Because it's the ball's being thrown at you at a vast knots, and it's split seconds, milliseconds we're talking about here. But is it pressure? Is it a lapse? What is this?
I mean, it's hard because you're fighting your natural instincts, and I think it's worth mentioning the corridor of uncertainty. Why we're called that is because it relates to a line and length and an angle, more importantly, coming back in at the batter where you're unsure whether you need to play it or not. And I think Scott Boland in particular is very, very good at putting it in that corridor of uncertainty. But my point being... He could be our
mascot.
Yes. My point being is that the way to play on this pitch was to do something different. It's what Harry Brook did. And up until Travis Head's knock, it was the only 50 of the match, and then Travis Head did it. A word for him because he has the perfect technique for attacking batting, because he stands in front of the stumps, as they all do, but he shows leg and off stump, but he plays in such a way where he really gets back. He doesn't come forward, which can be a little bit dangerous when playing on such a bouncy pitch. He sort of hangs back, and he even jumps off his feet to sort of catch the bounce, because he's not a particularly tall guy. Often you'll see if there's one in on his stumps, he looks like he's leaving his stumps exposed because he shows, I think he bats on leg stump, so he just show you 2 stumps. So you fire it in there, and he just hops up and meets it with a full blade. And then any width, he doesn't poke, he doesn't prod. He leans back and he thwacks it, he twats it. And I think that was the way to go, because especially on a bouncy pitch, you've got the slips. If you connect hard enough with the ball, it's never getting caught by a slip, it's flying away. And even if it does go to slip, it's going so fast. And so I think that's what's frustrating about this one from an England perspective. I don't think this was Bazball letting them down. I think this was them sort of rabbit in the headlights, not being able to think with enough clarity to say, actually, the way to go on this pitch is to try and knock them off the length, because if you're just going to let Scott Boland bowl there all day, you never score any runs.
And I saw also, I'm going to cheekily plug your Substack, Charlie, which I was mentioned in. That was a moment for me. First line as well. Oh, what a moment. But you titled that it was in the title. I can't recall the exact title. But this was not Bazball, was your reflection. And I would be really intrigued just to get maybe we don't want to spoil it because we want our listeners to go and read that, but just a condensation of your thoughts on why this wasn't a Bazball performance.
I think, yes, we scored quickly. Yes, we had a very fast bowling attack. But as I've said, I think, the dismissals, there were no dismissals to hyper-attacking shots, and I'm not saying it would have been better if that's how they were getting out. But it was part of the point of Bazball was to improve a flawed team. And Ollie Pope, we knew that Ollie Pope had these technical frailties, as did Jonny Bairstow when he was in the team, as did Zach Crawley. And the reason why their results improved under Bazball was because they took an approach that mitigated and minimised their weaknesses, because they put the onus back on the bowlers. If you let a quality bowler put it on a length, for the example of Jonny Bairstow, he had such a weakness on his stumps. If you let the bowler bowl to you, a smart bowler is going to bowl on Jonny Bairstow's stumps, and he's eventually going to get bowled or LBW because that's just a weakness in his game. If he is backing away, if he's hitting everything over the top and not worrying about the conventional test wisdoms of like having to keep it along the ground, because that's not how he got out, you give yourself a better chance of succeeding. And I think in this case, England's best chance of succeeding was to try and put the Australia bowlers off, because Scott Boland was not having a good game. Brendan Doggett was, he was okay on debut. Nathan Lyon wasn't needed. Mitch Starc was brilliant, but he is someone that is hittable, and we saw that in the second innings. Gus Atkinson got hold of him eventually, and that's also another very just classically England and Australia trope of the bowlers seemingly timing it better than the batters. So I think when I say it's not Bazball, I mean behind the veneer of the run rate and the pace of the attack, it was just a very standard England in Australia performance.
So it wasn't the Bazball that let us down?
No, it did let us down because it vanished. That's also letting us down.
Yeah.
And, there's a bit of a thing about England, saying Harry Brook, especially when he's doing the presses as the white ball captain, all he can say is, we needed to go harder. We should have gone harder. And sometimes it's not true, but sometimes it is true. And I think, although the go harder mantra is not helpful, Brendan McCullum used the word conviction, which I think is nail on the head. He said England needed to find their conviction again, and that Travis Head is someone who always plays with conviction. And I think that's the perfect word for his innings. Should
we get on to Travis Head then? I mean, there was two star players for Australia that we want to talk about. We mentioned them both there, Mitchell Starc and Travis Head. Should we start with Mr. Head and his century that really was a bit of a nail in the coffin? Would you say that was the thing that got Australia to a point of victory?
Yeah, you could even say it's more than a nail in the coffin. I think that the feeling when England were bowled out for 200, and what the commentators were saying, and I was thinking the same, is, this is the highest score of the match that Australia have to get here. This is not by any stretch of the imagination done. You've got Usman Khawaja still injured. You've got Jake Weatherald on debut, who lasted 2 balls in the first knot. You had Marnus and Steve Smith looking out of sorts in the first innings, and they're quality players. So, it was not over, and if England were able to replicate how they bowled, then they could have, and if there'd have been any kind of, early breakthroughs, it would have been a completely different game. And a very good stat is that the score was 0-1 in every innings, up to the last innings, in every innings there was a wicket in the first over with no score on the board. But then Travis Head walks out to open in place of the injured Usman Khawaja. And when Jake Weatherall gets out, it's 75 for none, which is, they've almost knocked half off the total. And Travis Head, I will admit that when I saw him walking out, my heart dropped. He is an opener in white ball cricket, and he's a very, very, very good one. I have not been widely for him batting in Test match cricket, just because I think you should have your trump card, your Harry Brook, your Rishabh Pant, your Travis Head at 5. Because even then, if you struggle up top, once the ball's a bit older, he can still cause damage. But in this situation, it was the perfect call, because they just needed to wrestle back the momentum that was in the hands of the opening bowlers in every other innings of the match. And it was, I think it turned out to be a masterstroke, and something that we could see replicated if Usman Khawaja isn't ready to play the next test.
So in a way, if Khawaja isn't ready to play the next test, do you think they've found a little bit of a secret there with putting Travis Head at?
I think he has opened in Test cricket before and done pretty well. They've tried it in Asia because he's not as good against spin, so the thinking is you're more likely to face fast bowling up top in Asia. But I do think they've happened across something that could work here, because not only does that allow them... Usman Khawaja didn't look fit. It seemed like just standing in the slips was too much for him. That's all he did all game, and he was tweaking his back. Cricket Australia had to come out and defend him for playing 3 rounds of golf, or 3 days of golf, in the lead up to the test. So it's nice for the shoe to be on the other foot for once, and it's not us that are having to talk about the players playing golf. But yeah, I do think that not only has Travis Head sort of shown the blueprint of how to nullify these English quicks, I think it also allows them to slot back in Bo Webster, who I think is really hard done by to not be playing. He's been one of their best players in the last year, while there's been question marks over their batting lineup. And while Cam Green hasn't been able to bowl, they've had Webster in as the all-rounder. And his bowling is, probably you could say not necessarily test level, but his batting was really impressive. There was a number of 50s while Australia's backs were against the wall that really got them out of trouble. And I think suddenly, if you have Head opening, Bo Webster slotting back in at 6 and Cam Green at 5, that's looking like a strong batting order. Alternatively, you could have Mitch Marsh in there, who you won't be familiar with, but is another one of those players who is just a different beast against England. He loves playing against England. I watched him smash 118 at Headingley in 2023. Mark Wood was bowling rockets. No one could cope with it, apart from him and Travis Head. And they sort of scratched Australia up to a respectable total. And there has been a little bit of talk about Mitch Marsh maybe returning again for the Ashes, because he's in great form. He's even gone back to play domestic first-class cricket, which suggests that he is interested.
Right. From Mitch Marsh to Mitch Starc then. What a link.
Very good.
The Australian, he was unbelievable, even straight out the bat, straight out of the blocks. He was dismissing left, right, and centre in that first England innings. He really turned up, didn't he? He
did, and it's worth saying that only 2 players had a good game for Australia, and they've won handsomely. And
that doesn't bode well, does it?
Yeah, exactly. And this is why they're such a champion team, is that they just have these absolute match winners that will stand up when required. And for Mitch Starc to be without both of his great mates in Hazelwood and Cummins, and to just step up like this, it's ominous. But he's a great player. He's got so many weapons to his arsenal. He's so tall. He swings it round corners. He gets seam movement. He's still ridiculously quick at his age. He's not a young man. But I don't think I noticed a ball that was under 140 kph down on the bottom of the screen, which is ridiculous for someone of his age. He's also at points in his career been the best white ball bowler in the world, so I don't think he's someone like a Scott Boland who doesn't have a plan B if you do attack him. He's got a vicious Yorker. He's got a toe-breaking Yorker. He's got a very sharp bouncer. He's just got it all, really. And worryingly for England, his absolute speciality is pink ball tests, and the next game.
And what's coming up next?
Yeah.
Yeah, just what you want to hear. There are a few ominous signs, aren't there, already? And you mentioned there that Australia only had, 2 real standout performers. Steve Smith, of course, stepping in as replacement captain. We've got written down here Smith's dismissal next. He didn't really get firing.
Well, that's Jamie Smith, which we'll get onto. Sorry, I forgot about.
The fact that there are multiple Smiths.
Yeah, which I told.
These errors are going to happen.
But no, it's good. We can talk about Steve Smith.
Yeah, well, I was intrigued as to, because there was a lot of talk about him coming into this Ashes.
Yeah, he is probably the best batter of this generation. But he didn't look comfortable in the first innings, and England looked a little bit on something. Anderson and Broad, for all their wonderful abilities, bowling at Steve Smith was never one. And in the build to this test, Stuart Broad was willing to admit that he still doesn't know how you get Steve Smith out. But I think that Bryden Carse showed the blueprint with just a fast, vicious back of the length ball. And Steve Smith's someone you're not just going to get out with one ball. You have to build pressure. England built pressure superbly. Atkinson and Archer with the new ball were just giving nothing away. And then Carse, when he came on, looked a little bit like he was going to drop the ball, like he was floating them up, but he's quickly got into his rhythm and he was just peppering back of the length. He really hits the pitch hard, and it was just something that Steve Smith, he did not look comfortable. He'd been struck multiple times on the hands and he looked a little jittery, which is not something that's easy to do. It's something that Jofra Archer famously did in the Lord's Test in 2019, where he struck him multiple times and he didn't dismiss him, but Smith took a blow to the neck, which meant he had to retire injured. And it does look like, excuse me, too many late nights watching the Ashes, I think. It did look like England were on something there.
So that's Smith's dismissal. Should we talk about Smith's dismissal now?
Yes. I was pretty furious when this happened. I think, in the benefit of hindsight, it's not the dismissal itself that I'm annoyed about, it's the way that it came about. So for context, because you were asleep at this point, ball was fired down the leg side. He sort of went to play it. Didn't appear to have got anything on it. Nothing was picked up on the stump mic to the naked ear. But Travis Head in at short leg and Alex Carey were quick to appeal. And Australia are very good at appealing for everything with conviction. And they also, they celebrate. As soon as they send something upstairs, they celebrate. And they did that in this case. They were clearly extremely confident. And Jamie Smith didn't look confident. And I think that you can probably say, with how confident Australia looked and with how not confident Jamie Smith looked, he did start to walk, that he probably had got something on it.
Right.
But the whole point of the video umpire is so that you're not going on, intuition and body language and stuff. That's supposed to take all of that out of the equation. And the video umpire was taking an age over decisions for the entire test. And yeah, you don't want things to feel rushed, but there were certain things like, there are at least 2 Australia catches, like the Mitch Starc one and 1 or 2 in the slips, that were like clearly fine from the naked eye, that he agonised over. And I know it's probably the biggest assignment of his career so far, and you don't want to cock it up. It was just, he was taking too long, and it was entering sort of VAR areas, which
is never a good thing.
Yeah, which cricket is very good at not doing, because there's clarity in procedure. They're quick. There's good communication between the umpire and the person who's running the video, and you can hear what they're saying, and there's a script that they follow very clearly. Whereas in this case, he was taking so long. The guy who was doing the video for him didn't seem to understand what he was asking for. And basically the confusion came because they use something very similar to Ultra Edge, but it's called Snicko, sort of the very Australian version of it. But it's, from what I can tell, it's just not as good as Ultra Edge. It's much more sensitive, the audio wave, so it's just going up and down like that anyway, whereas Ultra Edge only really seems to move when there's a genuine noise, which you can actually hear alongside being able to see it. This is much more just sort of up and down, and also it looked more similar to what we might call a murmur,
Right.
rather than a nick, which is like a big spike on the audio wave.
Yeah.
This was a bit more of like there was no sort of massive peaks. And frustratingly, there was a very similar one in the first innings, Marnus Labuschagne, which he even said, that's a murmur, I'm not going to take that as enough. And also the context is important, that it hadn't been given out on field.
Right.
But after about 5 minutes of looking at different angles, looking at one angle where when the murmur was there was daylight between anything, like it was clearly not hitting anything. He eventually picked 2 camera angles where you could not tell whether the ball was touching the bat. It was from behind and from in front.
Yeah.
So bat and ball were next to each other, but not in a way where you could actually tell that it was touching, even though there had been one available that they'd looked at and then dismissed. He then eventually cited the Snicko sort of margin of error, which states that sometimes the sound will appear 1 frame before or 1 frame after the accompanying frame of video, and basically said that was enough to prove that he had hit it and to overturn the decision.
But overturning, I feel that, and usually the way it's done in across sport is that to overturn something, there has to be a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that usually when there's an on-field decision, that, the gut feeling of a seasoned, referee, I mean, you say it's the umpire's, biggest assignment, but someone who's been round the block, I think it's fair to say, if you've been given this assignment, then that gut feeling, that first impression must mean something. And if it's so tight and it's so, it's far from unanimous, it's far from obvious, then you would imagine that some, a leaning to an extent would be given to that gut feeling. So why wasn't it?
Especially when the technology is being a little bit unreliable, as it was in this case.
And as you said, he'd previously in the match gone, I can't trust that, I'm going to stick with what I think.
And it's also a completely normal phrase to hear the video umpire, or the third umpire as they're known, say, I don't have enough evidence to overturn this decision, so I won't. So I was a little bit confused. I think it was a major point in the game as well, because a word for Jamie Smith, I think he was hard done by this test. I think both times he got off to a good start and looked like he understood a little bit better how to play on this pitch than most. He was driving straight, he was putting away that extra cover drive, and he's also very good at, if anything short, muscling it away, even on the front foot. He doesn't have to lean back to pull. He's a big, tall, strong man. He can just get down on it and smash it. And I think in the first innings, he looked to be putting a really nice partnership together with Brook when Brook was dismissed. And then the tail just didn't look willing to hang around with him. Bryden Carse got out very quickly with a swipe at a short ball. So he was like, I'm just going to have to go here. He went and he got out. And then in this one, again, he looked pretty good. And then got out in a little bit unlucky way. But, as frustrated I was by the decision and the way it came about, I think you do have to ultimately say it did seem like he maybe thought he was out. So, but also maybe they was, saying on the telly that maybe that's a little bit of immaturity and inexperience, that maybe next time he won't walk and make the decision so easy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't think Stuart Broad would have made it that easy. So there was a time that we've alluded to in this first test when things seemed to be going rather well. When you sent me that voice note, of course, England's attack, early on seemed like it had figured Australia out a little bit. It seemed like, those were the headlines. England. What a display from England's attack. The pace, the power. Well, it went wrong. It went wrong somewhere down the line, but it was going so well.
It was, and there's positive signs to take for sure. I think the last few Ashes have shown that this is what Australia don't like. It's maybe what you wouldn't, not necessarily what you'd think, because they're used to playing fast bowlers domestically and used to playing on fast wickets. But if we go back as far as 2019, Jofra Archer had Steve Smith in all kind of trouble at Lords. And then the next Ashes, it was a horror show, but the only person who sort of left it with their head held high was Mark Wood. He did really well and across 4 tests. And then the thinking was, we want Wood for the next Ashes fit. It turned out that he wasn't fit until the 3rd test. England lost the first 2. He emerges at Headingley. They won 2 of the next 3. And you could argue could have won all 3. And then fast forward to now, they clearly don't like pace. I think Steve Smith and Marnus Labuschagne in particular struggle with it compared to other forms of bowling. And yeah, I think medium pace, they'll play it all day. Steve Smith will play it all day. England don't have the spinner of the calibre to worry Australia, and they like to smash them out for the attack. So this, I think 5 quicks as we went with, is definitely the way to go. And I think the method was vindicated in the first innings. And I also accused them of probably not having the accuracy or consistency in our preview, and thought that was what was going to let us down. And that was absolutely not the case in the first innings. They were hammering away at a good length. I do think they lost it in the second innings, and I think that Bryden Carse in particular, and it's been shown in ODI cricket, someone who maybe struggles a little bit when someone goes after him, and Travis Head just dismantled him in that second innings, and it's given England food for thought. I think there's a lot to like about the bowling performance, but if Head is going to continue to open and if he is going to attack them, they're going to have to think of a plan B.
Do you think, so obviously the chase that Australia had would have, as you said, it biggest total of the test. Do you think it was a case of the bowling attack weakening or not being on the same level that they were earlier on? Or do you think it was more of a case that Australia figured them out?
I think it's a mixture of things. I think, yeah, definitely Australia's more aggressive approach worked, as that's my main takeaway from this test, is it was the kind of pitch where an aggressive approach was just the approach to take. I think they were reeling a little bit from not having long enough to recover, which is a theme of Bazball, collapse or no collapse. The fast nature of the batting doesn't give the bowlers long to recover. I think less so in this case because they had 5 quicks to rotate, and also Australia didn't have long either, and Mitch Starc was absolutely fine. So I think, and England hadn't had a massive amount of overs in the legs. They've still only bowled 70 overs across the game as a team, because of the nature of the game. I think, as I said earlier, I think the pitch flattening out was a big part of that, and it just flattened out as a day 2 pitch. You would imagine it too. There was a point, and it's a horrible point in any batting innings, where you think you're a little bit light on runs, where the bowlers suddenly start to smack it about and you're like, oh, nice, okay, we needed this. But then in the back of your head you go, well, why are the bowlers suddenly able to time it? Gus Atkinson played a blinder of little knock, and Bryden Carse looked able to hit them as well.
So if they can do it.
Yeah, if they could, exactly. I think part of it was just that Australia moved to short pitch bowling probably a little bit too quick, and I think probably could have kept pitching it up, but it did seem like the steepling bounce was disappearing. And then you get the roller on it, which I think I've maybe told you about the roller a little bit before, but that's basically something that looks a little bit like a lawnmower that is available to the batting side before an innings or before the start of a day's play. And you can choose the heavy roller or the light roller, and that sort of affects how the pitch performs. It's meant to sort of flatten it out a bit, for a little bit anyway. And I think the roller and the day 2 pitch just sort of took their toll in the end. And the pitch just did get better to bat on, but that's not something you can just chalk up to bad luck for England, because had they been able to occupy the crease for longer, they would have had Australia batting preferably on, the evening of the 3rd day, and then the bulk of the chase happening on the 4th day. And I think England just had a real opportunity to just put their foot on the throat, which is a recurring theme of Bazball. And I think not only that, but within the innings themselves, I think England got bowled out in about 30 overs both times, and 30 overs is when we expect the kookaburra ball that Australia use to go soft, and then run scoring's become much easier. So were England to be 100 for 3 in 30 overs, not likely for them because that's going at 3 and over, or 120 for 3, let's say, going at 4 and over. If that's Brook and Stokes batting together, you'd then think they would be able to put the foot down a little bit more and it would have got easier. And it's just a little bit of immaturity from England to not let it get to that point until it's Atkinson and Carse.
Strange, isn't it, that we came into this thinking that, well, the England batsmen, they're pretty secure. They should be the stars of the show. Will the attack have what it takes? Are we going to pick the right attack? Are they going to be able to get the conditions right? And actually, what we're sat here saying is, if the batters could have, done their side of the bargain, then we might have been in a better position. So it seems to be turned out the other way around almost.
Yeah, but it was a bowler's pitch. I think ultimately both sides found it a lot easier with the ball than with the bat. I think even Australia in the first innings, Mitch Starc's side didn't bowl that well and they still bundled England out. So it was a pitch for the bowlers. However, my point is that on a pitch for the bowlers, the best way to bat is to try and do something different. And that's sort of why I still think that Bazball is a good method on pitches that are doing a bit. That was their method going into the India series. They were like, well, these pitches are going to spin a lot. So all it takes is for one of our batters to take a risk and just a quick fire 80 could turn the test. And we saw in the end, it took almost 200 from Ollie Pope. But I think India recognised that. And then going forward, they prepared flat pitches and they won comfortably. So I do think the frustrating thing is these kind of pitches should suit Bazball, and they definitely suit Travball, as we've just seen.
Is that what they're calling it?
That's what they call it, yeah.
Travball. I'm going to just deliver this question to you as it's written down because it kind of says all that needs to be said. Is there any way back for England, Charlie?
I think the atmosphere has soured remarkably quickly.
Yeah.
Even after day 1 of the test, our friends at the West Australian were really hammering the Australian team on the back pages, saying they were too old. I think they were called Dad's Army by some. And then literally 24 hours later, it's England who feel like there's 2 months to go of this. And I think the feeling is that they're going to lose. I think there is reasons why. It's not just pessimism. I think there's reasons why to feel like this. I think that first test was a golden opportunity. Well,
we were saying, weren't we? We got to win this first test.
Yeah, and I think not only did we were saying that before, I think with how it was going, it's very easy to think, if this was a game where we were really in there, slim first innings lead, to lose comfortably just makes you think what's going to happen when we are in proper strife. And also I think this second test has been genetically engineered in a lab to be Australia's best chance of winning a game. Yeah. It's at Brisbane, which is the place where they're sort of typically the best at winning. It's usually why it's the first test, because they just get off to a flyer. But it's been married with the pink ball test, of which Australia have won 13 of a possible 14, of which Mitch Starc is the best bowler ever, and of which Nathan Lyon is actually very, very handy as well. So even though something I want to tell you, which is also why we're saying, is there a way back? You're not super familiar with the Starc Cummins Hazelwood triumvirate. Why they're so good is because they're all brilliant, and they're all brilliant for different reasons. And when one of them is struggling, the others step up. However, I think there's a lot of people out there were you to ask them in Test cricket in particular to rank them worst to best, and it's not easy. There's a lot of people who would put Mitch Starc bottom of that list. Wow. So, and
after how he played,
he's the worst one.
Yeah.
So, are they to come back? That sort of spells trouble. The noise is that Hazelwood is still not fit, so he's probably not going to play the next test, as it seems. But even if Cummins didn't play, you'd back Starc to rip through England on his own as he did in this test.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly said in our preview podcast that this second test at Brisbane was, as you said, genetically engineered for Australia. kind of no chance, and that was why we really did put a strong emphasis on winning this first test. But also, I think the deflation, in a way, the fact that I saw an article on BBC Sport which was saying that in a way this is worse because we were in that test. This is an England side that should have been able to, like on ability and where they were in the moment, and yet there was still a capitulation, there was still a collapse. And how do you go from we were well in it and we collapsed to we're not expecting to be in this one? It just doesn't bode well, does it? Yeah,
and I think the England players are very aware of that, and like they seem really hurt, and they've not just brushing it off. Mark Wood said that if he could, he would drive to the next test, which would take about 4 days just to keep his mind going. He said, which suggests that they are reeling.
Is that good? Do you want them reeling?
No, I don't think so. We were walking through John Lewis the other day, and we were saying that one thing that really separates top level athletes from us norms is their ability to cart. Start that sentence again. We were saying in John Lewis recently that the ability of an athlete to cart.
To what?
To compartmentalize. To compartmentalize defeats, put them away, put them in a little box, and just not think about them is what makes them so much better than other people. So to hear that, an England player wants to drive 4 days through the outback because he's that hurt.
That's not compartmentalizing, is it, Charlie?
It's not compartmentalizing. No, well, he is trying to compartmentalize. Maybe that's what I meant. One way you think of going about it would be to get a bit of practice in. And there's a 2-day practice match, which England Lions are playing with the pink ball. So would you like to hazard a guess of how many of England's first choice batters are going to play that game?
Well, the way you've teed that up suggests it's something in the realms of 0.
It is exactly 0. And preparation is not something we touched on in the preview, and it was kind of the talk of the town at the time, but we just didn't get around to it, and it was, a bit overdone, I thought. However, this time it's like, come on, this is a golden opportunity. I could understand when there was a shorter gap between the matches, not wanting to disrupt preparation, but like you've been handed a golden opportunity here to play a pink ball game, and you're not taking it.
Why? Why do you reckon that is?
Do you know England just have their own ways of going about preparation, and they think it's more important to train hard, but also give the players the freedom to do what they want, to have some downtime, and to really bond as a group. There's always talk, and this is partly why I didn't want to talk about it, was that, you always get the old players coming out the woodwork saying, well, when we were there...
Back in my day.
Yeah, we were here a month before, we played all these warm-up games, we even played, high-level cricket. But that's just not possible anymore. The schedule doesn't allow it. I think home teams have cottoned on to the fact of like, why are we handing this good preparation on a silver platter to teams? So a lot of these, Australia A, Australia 11, Prime Minister's 11 teams that England could theoretically set up games against, they're not going to be a particularly high quality because the good players are either playing for Australia or they're in the Sheffield Shield. So there is argument to say that actually, the merit in these games isn't what it used to be. That being said, I think this is a special case where it's like, it does reek of arrogance a little bit. And what are England to go down in this test? That's all anyone is going to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. We got written down here the TNT sport coverage. Now, you were telling me when we were up at about 10 to 4 in the morning before that first innings, about how, because obviously it's so early in the morning in this country, the Ashes, that there was less sort of competition. There wasn't really a scramble or a free-for-all to achieve the broadcasting rights. So it's ended up with TNT, and you're intrigued as to how they were going to go about it and what we were going to make of it. So what were your thoughts on it, Charlie?
Yeah, I'm unconvinced. Teething problems is to be expected, I suppose, but I still think it's a far from ideal situation to be in, where everyone knew that this was going to be on TNT. It was last time. It was the time before. The last India series was on it. The last New Zealand series was on it. If people had to guess what it was going to be on, they would have said this, but that wasn't a known fact until so late on because of the way the rights are sold, which has meant that it's left TNT scrambling to put a team together. I've told you about it. They've done it in the past where for the India series, they had to fly all the pundits out to Stockholm because they organised it all so late that there was no BT, TNT studio available in England. So they were in Sweden,
ridiculous, isn't it?
watching on television a game that was happening in India. This time around, they've got people on the ground, but not enough. And they've also got 3 lead commentators who are very capable, but they're not cricketers. And that is just the done thing in cricket coverage. The entire Sky team are cricketers. And I think it's such a nuanced game. And the way we speak about it, there's so much terminology, and it's so easy to put it in to use the right words, but put it in a sentence where it just sounds wrong to the trained ear.
And also, it's also worth saying that people who are going to get up and watch this live, they're going to know their stuff.
Yeah, they're nuffies, exactly. And there were so many times where,
apart from me.
Yeah, well, is it? But you do it sometimes, but you're learning, and it's kind of like the idea of this podcast is
that's
that you're
what we're
learning.
doing here.
You're not covering the Ashes. No. And I think there were just so many occasions of them just saying things in a way where it's like, yeah, that's technically not wrong, but
you wouldn't say that.
You wouldn't say that. And also I also think there was plenty of moments where a certain shot was played and he goes, oh, and that'll be runs for England. He's done this and he's done that, and he was constantly leaning on these phrases. They were constantly leaning on these phrases the battering ram of the bowling attack was just said over and over again, and they were saying all these words in a situation where Michael Atherton would have just been like, that's a nice shot. And then
that's all you need, isn't it?
And that's all you need, because cricket is supposed to be conversational. Cricket coverage, it differs from other sports. It's just 2 people having a chat. And in this case, it felt like one person calling it as it was and another person analysing it, which is fine for radio. It's how it's done on radio. And on radio, you obviously need to explain in detail what's actually happening because people can't see. In telly, just, it's a long day. Don't wear yourself out. Just say a bit.
Let the pictures do the talking.
Michael Holding, one of the best commentators ever. He was an old West Indian fast bowler. Kept it super simple, had a great voice, he had great insight when he needed it. But his favourite thing to say after a shot was played, he'd just go, runs.
I love that.
Like a beautiful West Indian accent with a deep voice, he'd just go, runs. Nice. And that's all you need. And I think also a word for Ebony Rainford Brent, Stephen Finn and Alistair Cook. They were on air the entire time for 2 days straight. It was always that. So there was 2, it was either 1 or 2 out of the 3 of them on as the co-commentator the entire time. And when you get, the good thing about the Sky Sports team, for example, is they'll have 6 or 7 people. And because none of them are designated lead and co-commentators, they can mix and match them in any way so that, people are actually getting a good break in between and they're fresh. And there were just points when the commentary team they weren't sounding fresh and they were getting people's names wrong. They were even getting each other's names wrong. Someone said Emily Rainford Brent at one point and it's Ebony Rainford Brent. And there was also times, something that really frustrates me about, I think one reason why Sky don't do it is because the expectation for them would be to send out their own camera team. They would have their own feed. And that's really expensive. But the problem with using the host feed is that they were looking at things that they didn't want to be looking at, or they didn't know why they were looking at it. Obviously, it's been teed up by the home commentary team to say that, in 30 seconds, we're going to feed in this clip of Ollie Pope batting in 6 months ago and him batting now, because I want to talk about the technical differences he's made.
And they're reacting to something they haven't planned for.
Yeah,
basically.
and so they were coming up and it was just like, you could tell they were just looking at it like, what are we supposed to be saying? And there was one where it's like a slow-mo of Ollie Pope's technique, and Alice Cook just went, it's a nice slow-mo there. Or like they were all just, it got to the point where they were all just taking the piss out of the like skeleton thing.
Which we did instantaneously, didn't we?
Yeah, but they were just annoyed of it. They were just like, why are we looking at this? There was a point when they had Darren Lehman on, the ex-Australian coach, and it came up and they were like, so do you know why this is on there, Darren? And he was just like, oh, I thought this was normal. So it's clearly just like a thing that they do in Australia, but it's not something that they're used to. And also, that's another thing that frustrated me, is that there were no Australians in the team, and just led to some like really quite openly biased commentary, which I think is fine to lean one way or another, but I think you should be a little bit impartial and you should have a range of opinions.
At least a slight balance.
There was a point when, and I've so sorry, I don't know her name, and the TNT presenter, and I'll find it for next time. And she's clearly a very good presenter, but in the interval after Smith's dismissal, she said, well, we can't find anyone that thinks that he should have been given out. And it's like, yeah, because there's 5 English people talking to each other. And Alistair Cook rightly said, well, I think we're surrounded by about 50,000 people who think it should have been out. Mm. So I do think they need to look into getting a commentator. They had Darren Lehman and Justin Langer on at points, but it was more framed in the way of like an interview, which I also really don't like. I don't like interviewing someone during play because it means you're not fully reacting to what's happening. Anyway, I think maybe people who aren't as anal as me won't be as annoyed about.
But a lot of people will be.
I think a lot of people will be, and I think especially through the lens of like us having done just like a very broadcast heavy journalism course, I would dream of creating a product as good as TNT Sports coverage of anything. Like, it's to a high quality, but I do think there was just clearly things you could see just weren't going to plan as well. There were also like VTs getting put in that weren't showing up. So it would cut to the stump cam and there would be a little comment at the bottom saying Ollie Pope 6 months ago versus now, and just nothing would show up. So yeah, a lot of teething problems, which I think need addressing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think what we've displayed there is just how much high quality analysis you're going to get on the corridor of uncertainty. Because what we've done there is analysed the shift patterns of the commentary team of TNT Sports during the Ashes. You won't get that anywhere else. So I think maybe we should get the job. Not me, you should. So let's cast our net forward in time. I almost don't really want to after what we've spoken about. I just suddenly, saying that sentence, I went, oh God, do we have to? But I mean, all we've been saying so far is how this is bread and butter for Australia. The pink ball, the Brisbane test. Can we find anything to get us excited from an England perspective?
I'm looking forward to watching that bowling attack under the lights, and I think it will be that bowling attack for what it's worth. I can't see England making any changes unless they're enforced, and I think that's fine. I don't think it was the balance of the team that cost England this game. I think if you're looking at changing anything, it would probably be the batting lineup, but it's probably a little bit soon for that. I also think that we're probably, fitness permitting, looking at a similar Australia team. I think the only differences we will see will be fitness related. I do think that if Khawaja pulls up, they'll probably give him a chance because he barely featured in this game. So they'll maybe want to give him one game and say, prove that we shouldn't have Head or someone else opening. If he does get dropped, he will never come back. He's 38, 39 by the end of the series. It's a funny little tidbit, actually, that he has only been... So he's been in and out of the team over the years. He's a very, very good player, but he was dropped a couple of times, and he only actually came in to the Australia team in the last Ashes as an enforced change because Travis Head got COVID. So they put him in at 5. He scored twin tons in a game. So then when Travis Head came back in, they were like, well, we can't drop this guy now, but Travis Head bats 5. So they kicked out Marcus Harris, who was the most out of form. And Khawaja's been opening ever since to great effect. But he is starting to decline now. It's understandable. He's very old. But it's just funny that an enforced Khawaja change then led to Travis Head playing an absolute blinder of an innings as well. So those two have sort of seesawed over the years. But this is all to say that I think Australia will pick a similar team. I think the only difference would be that if Pat Cummins is ready, he'll be straight back in. I think probably for Brendan Doggett. I think Scott Boland has sort of earned his place in the team in that second innings with his forfeit, and also he's higher at the pecking order anyway. So I think we're looking at two very similar teams. I think England just flat out need to score more runs.
And we haven't really spoken about a certain Mr. Joe Root, have we? Of course, there was always going to be the talk coming in about the century, about how he's never really found his feet in Australia. He didn't really find his feet in Australia this time around. Do you think things will improve? Do you think there's a chance of him, getting a grip of this one?
Yeah, he's a very, very smart man and smart batter, and he's able to adapt. And I think he's shown in the India series he had a slow start, and by the end he was in great form. Obviously, these are much more alien conditions to him, and the conditions he struggles with more than any. I think he'll do better than 0 and 6 or whatever it was. Like, you can only really go one way from there. However, it did bring back worry straight away, because he looks like a different player when he's in Australia, and it's worrying.
It is worrying. I guess you just hope that he's able to find something. What do you think it was this time around that he was lacking?
I think he got a good ball in the first innings. I was explaining to you at the time that the way his bat was facing implied that he was trying to play it on the leg side, which maybe was a little bit of a misreading of the length of the ball or whatever, but also I think it was the movement that Starc got, which moved it away from where Root thought it was going to be. In the second innings, he was guilty of what many an England player were, of driving when he just shouldn't have driven. And I do think if there is one player who's going to be able to do the Sachin-esque put a shot away, it'll be Joe Root. And I'm sure he's done it at points in his career. So yeah, I have hope in that sense, and I think if anyone's going to adapt, it will be him.
Nice. Well, let's hope so. It's quite a bit of a break, isn't it, until the next test, 4th to the 8th of December in Brisbane, as we mentioned. These ones starting at 4 a.m. as well. So, any final thoughts, Charlie, that we can expect from that test? We're obviously feeling quite low. We're feeling quite subdued about it. I tried to coax some positivity out of you there, but if we're going to make any predictions, I assume I can sort of guess what that would be going into this one.
Yeah, I'm not changing my opinion. Like we said in our breakdown, that my prediction was that Australia were going to win this one, and then for what it's worth, your prediction was that England would win the first test and then Australia would win the rest, or at least 3 of the rest. So I think we both had this down as an Australia win. I can't see that changing. And also, it's interesting, this is the first time England have ever lost the first test of a away series under Stokes and McCullum. They've won the first test every other time. So whether that leans itself towards 5-0 and we will drop off, or
maybe we reverse the fortunes. Yes, and actually, exactly. It's a good thing.
Yes. I will say that I'd be very, very shocked if Mitch Starc didn't end up as the leading wicket taker this series now.
Absolutely. Well, and he's, as you've said, he's probably the best, did you say of all time when it came to the pink ball stuff?
Let's quickly get his record up.
Let's have a look.
Mitch Starc. 74 wickets in 13 matches at an average of 18. Strike rate of 34, meaning he takes a wicket every 34 balls. And in the final test against West Indies a few months ago, which was a pink ball test, West Indies was set a gettable total, and Mitch Starc bowled them out for 27. He took 6 for 9.
Oh my God. Yeah, well, it's all sounding very ominous, isn't it?
Yeah, but final thoughts from me, strapping.
Strapping, absolutely. Well, we'll be there, we'll be covering it. I'll hopefully be a bit more available for these this test. And hopefully it turns out a bit better than this one. We don't have much hope, but what little hope there is, we'll try and dredge it from deep within us. Thank you for joining us, and fingers crossed, day.
See you soon.